So I think without further ado, we can just dive right in to our session. Now, before we go into the actual insights, I do want to have like a quick overview of the environment and how our customers' environments look like to kind of just set the tone. So here are a few interesting data points that we pulled, like I mentioned, from across our customer environments. I would mention that we have customers of varying sizes and varying industries. So this is kind of the average of all of those. Starting off with our average MTTR. So average MTTR in our platform is about 33 days. Again, worth mentioning, this is for all vulnerabilities, so critical, non-critical, and anything in between. So of course, the time would vary depending on the criticality of the vulnerability. Next up is our average SPR, security posture rating. So pretty much how good are you at managing exposure risk across your different assets and percentages, how many of your assets are compliant with your security standards. So the average is 75% for your benchmark. All right, so next up is our average SLA. So what we did here is kind of compared how different company sizes are defining their SLA deadlines. And the interesting thing here is that we see that it's pretty much the same across different sizes. So from small all the way to large enterprises, it's kind of all on the same average or 50 days of SLA. Again, side note that this is also for all vulnerability types, critical and non-critical. Of course, we would expect that the critical vulnerabilities would have a lower SLA policy than the rest. All right, and for our last data point, scanner types. So as Tal and Aviva mentioned in their previous session, we are pulling information from various different sources and scanner types. So this is kind of the breakdown of how that looks like with the Vulcan customers. So I think it's pretty interesting to see that we have almost half of all scanners doing host. So most as host security scanners, 46%, and the rest is kind of almost equally divided between all the rest, which is cloud, network, asset repositories, and code projects. All right, so I think we kind of set the tone. We have a better understanding of how the environments look like, and this is the perfect time to move into our first insight. All right, so the first one is all about the impact of risk-based prioritization and what that means for your company. Now, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, let me give you a quick definition of what we at Vulcan Cyber refer to as a risk-based prioritization or a holistic risk score, or however you would want to call it. So basically, we would refer to a risk score that takes into account 3 different factors. So the first one would be CVSS or any other kind of formula that you would use to calculate your technical severity. The next one would be your business context. So your assets, their interdependencies, and of course, their priorities to your specific company, which one are more important and which ones are less important. And the last one would be your threat intelligence. So again, like Aviva mentioned, we are connecting to many different threat intelligence feeds. So bringing in that external temporal data, for example, exploitability, exploit maturity, or anything else of that sort. So combining all that 3 factors, we would have a holistic risk score. Now, what we've done here is trying to understand the impact of that holistic scoring approach. Now, we have compared how many critical vulnerabilities you would have based on the holistic risk score in comparison to a CVSS-only prioritization system. Now, we have a few data points, but I would like to focus on the top left for now, critical vulnerabilities. As you can see, this is a sample data from a specific customer. So we can see here that if you would look at the CVSS only, we would have about 65,000 different vulnerabilities that are considered critical, right? In comparison, if it was rated by the holistic risk score, we would have about 37. So almost half of what you would have as CVSS prioritization. So already we can immediately see the huge difference and the impact that we have when we're using the holistic risk. And again, this is not missing out on risks, right? This is staying focused on the risks that are actually critical to you and the ones that you actually need to prioritize versus ones that are maybe technically severe, but have no impact on your specific business. And I think the data on the bottom here is very, very interesting to see because this is from across different environments, across different company sizes, and different industries. And we have calculated about 3.5 million different vulnerabilities that would be critical according to CVSS score alone, in comparison to 500,000 vulnerabilities that would be critical according to a holistic risk score. So imagine you would be dealing with an extra 3 million vulnerabilities that you don't have to, or you would eventually deal with, but not as a critical or a high priority. So I think this is very, very great data that kind of emphasizes how important it is to actually calculate risk according to a more holistic approach and more business specific rather than a pretty one size fit all CVSS scoring. However, still 90% of security teams rely on CVSS for risk prioritization. Isn't that crazy? So yeah, I looked at the number and I couldn't believe it because 90% is so high. And I started to think about why that would happen. Of course, there are many different reasons to that. But I put here the top 3 that, in my opinion, are giving a lot of impact to that reason. So first one would be choosing simplicity over efficiency. Pretty self-explanatory. Many security teams just choose the easy way and use their pre-ready CVSS scores that they're getting from their security scanners, and that's it. The next reason would be our data silos. So, if you're using multiple different security scanners and you don't have a platform such as Vulcan Cyber, then you would have all your data in silos, and correlating that, organizing all of that, and then enriching it with your additional context is just a lot of work. And it's very hard to accomplish this when you're working in silos. And the last one is the lack of access to threat intelligence. And yes, you are right. You could access threat intelligence online. There's a lot of feeds available for free, and you don't have to have anything too special to access them, but you need to correlate them with your current vulnerabilities in your environment. And that is a very, very monumental task to take on that many companies just don't. So let me leave you with that as some food for thought, and we can jump right into our next insight. All right, so our next topic is all about automation and how it's helping reduce MTTR. So what we've done here is we have compared automated remediation processes versus unautomated remediation processes and saw how big is the automation impact. Is it very much worth your investment, or is it just a hype? So again, we have a lot of different data here, but let's focus on the top left chart, identification to action in days. So basically, how long did it take for us from the moment we identified this vulnerability until the time we took some sort of remediation action on it? So as you can see, if we did it with no automation at all, it would take us about 48 days to do so, in comparison to only 20 days using an automated process. This would be, again, for all vulnerabilities, not specific to critical ones. So off the bat, pretty easy to see a huge impact. Less than half the time that it would take us using automation. All right, and the next data point that I want to mention here is the right one here on the bottom, 13 days. So if you remember from the first slide that I showed, we saw that the average MTTR is about 33 days, right? Now we're seeing that if we are implying some sort of automation and using automation for our processes, it would take us about 13 days to close a remediation ticket. And this is already a substantial reduction. And again, this is not only for critical vulnerabilities, this is for all vulnerability types. And I would imagine that for critical ones, this would be even lower. So again, I think from this data alone, it's pretty easy to see that automation is doing a great job at helping security teams reduce MTTR, take action faster, and just resolve the tickets that are opening for engineering. And yet, still 70% of security teams don't use automation. Again, not as high as 90, but pretty high. 70% is a lot. So again, I took the liberty of kind of thinking what would be the main reasons that would happen. So the first one is lack of trust in automation. And that's pretty similar to, AI just now entering the game and impacting cybersecurity. The same has happened and is still happening with automation. Security teams don't trust it. They want to do it themselves. They want to have full control, and it's kind of holding them back from adopting this new technology. The next one is kind of related to the first one, fear of ticket overload. Now, I guess everyone here on the summit knows the struggle of working with IT, engineering, R&D, or different asset owners, and there's always this friction between security teams and remediation owners, and there's this fear that your automation would just create too many tickets, like and overwhelm engineering to the point that they say, enough, I'm not doing anything for you, and just like increases the difficulty of collaborating together. Now, this fear is actually pretty understandable, and it, we at Vulcan Cyber know it pretty well, but there is a solution to it. If you want, stick after the summit and we'll talk this through. And lastly, missing the right tools. Again, pretty self-explanatory. If you don't have the right tools to do automation, you probably won't be doing automation. Okay, again, leaving you as food for thought and moving on to our last insight of today and of the summit in general. So our next topic is reporting and risk reporting. Now, when I went into this, I wanted to know, is reporting something that is super, super important to security teams? They go in a lot of times, or is this something that they use only when they need to pass a compliance audit, right? So we checked how often your users log in to view the reports. Now, if you see the number 558 here on the top, so 558 times, this is the monthly views that a single user environment would go in to check their reports. All right, single customer, how many users they may have. Maybe one customer may have like 10 different or 50 different users, depends on the company size. But this single customer would go in to check their reports about 558 times a month. So for me, that is a pretty good number. That means that it's very important to them. And then just to kind of verify this, we also checked the frequency, and this is what you can see right here, 1.7 days. So about every day and a half, someone goes in to check out a security report. It could be one person, it could be 100 people. So now you're probably wondering, okay, but what are they looking at? And this is why we prepared the list of the top 5 reports that our customers are using. So what I found interesting here is that even within those 5 reports, we have pretty good diversity of use cases. So number 1 and number 2 are more of a high-level executive reports. This is the security posture rating report and our CISO management report. So, high-level board leadership executives kind of trying to get a sense of the security and risk metrics of the company. Number 3, on the other hand, is the top operational report. And this is a much more granular report, more fitting for operational purposes. And number 4 and 5 are, remediation, purely remediation. We have remediation performance and SLA tracking. So they're being used to track remediation and ensure it happens within the defined SLA, and that there is also an improvement in reducing MTTR. So again, I think it's pretty clear from this data that reporting is pretty important to security teams. They're going in very, very frequently into the reports, and they are using it for various different use cases. And still 30% of security teams don't measure or track remediation progress. Now, this is a much better data point than the ones we saw for automation and prioritization. 30%, not so high. We can deal with it. But still, we would imagine that by now, every single security team would be using some sort of reporting and would be tracking the remediation. So again, some reasons why that may be. So first of all, pretty similar to the automation part, lack of reporting tools. If you don't have the proper reporting tools, you may be doing it using Excel or some other things like that, but it's just very, very difficult to maintain. The second one is cross-team dependencies. Again, talking about the friction between security teams and IT engineering. Many of the data for remediation, including ticketing resolution, and all that stuff resides within the asset owner side and not within the security team. And getting this data constantly, if you don't have the proper integrations between systems, is going to be quite the headache. And lastly, focus on immediate fixes. So we see that a lot where security teams are too overwhelmed with the amount of vulnerabilities that they have to manage and remediate, when they're just kind of chasing their own tail with remediating the next vulnerability, and kind of losing track of zooming out and taking a look at the bigger picture and making some informed decisions into how they can better manage their exposure risk, increase efficiency, reduce MTTR, reduce the workload, and just take better control over their exposure management. Okay, I talked fast, but the one thing that I want to leave you guys with is numbers don't lie. And every single piece of data that I brought here is accurate from real security teams this year, 2024. And I think the data was pretty clear in showing the importance of proper holistic risk prioritization, using automation, and using risk reporting to really understand your exposure management program. So if one of those 3 things are still not happening with your team, still lacking one of those, I really, really recommend that you put this as a priority for this year and for 2025. And I wish you all the luck in doing so. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to our team if you need any assistance.